And Robert William Cray is an American blues guitarist and singer. And he led his own band and has won 5 Grammy Awards. And he's been active since 1974. Now, the albums that we did for Mr. Cray, we did Who's Been Talkin', which I definitely have the year it was released, because it was released in 1980.
That is correct.
Then we followed that up with Strong Persuader from 1986.
86.
And then we followed that up with 2020's That's What I Heard.
Very
and
good.
I did a lot of talking, Nick, so why don't you start with Who's Been Talking?
I would love to. So, to be clear, I've never heard this record before this week, but I'm very, very familiar with the next record. So I had certain kind of expectations of sound, and I know Robert Cray is very well known as a blues musician and guitarist, and that's what you get here. It is a blues record, but I think one thing that is clear right from the get-go is that Cray is a guy, even when he's not writing a lot of the songs originally on his records, he's a guy who cares a lot about the craft of the song itself, and not just like as about it being like a super blues purist. So the positive result you get from that is 10 tracks on a blues record, what is definitively to the listener a blues record, but it doesn't get monotonous like, okay, here's the same old, 8 or 12 bar progression that's happening over and over and over again in different keys. Like, it definitely keeps itself varied and interesting enough throughout to not just like, as you kind of often say, Pat, blues has a peak, and at some point, like, if you're going to try to do the same thing that blues musicians were doing since the 20s, it's just not going to hit. And Cray doesn't get stuck in that space, I think. He doesn't fully have his voice on the guitar the way that I can identify his playing on Strong Persuader here yet, but he's getting there. And for someone who's known as a blues guitarist, he is a good singer. Robert Cray does have a nice voice. I think it's very good for the genre that he does. So I think it was a good start for him. And of course, this album went nowhere because his record label immediately folded upon releasing this record. Probably not related.
Yeah, that is something that has happened more than once on this podcast.
Right.
Which just sucks. I listened to this with no expectations. I had heard of Robert Cray. I had not heard Robert Cray. So I was very much in the realm of, he's a blues guitarist. I kind of know what I'm going to get. I really enjoyed this album. I thought it was really strong all the way through. I thought that the lyrics were what really surprised me a lot throughout this album. As you just mentioned, and as I've said a billion times on the show, blues can definitely be where I just stop listening to lyrics, because otherwise I'll just be a little bit disappointed. And I didn't get that at all here. I thought each song had meaning and each song had purpose, and they all kind of complemented each other really well. I thought that maybe there was a couple times when the messages overlapped song to song, but at the end of the day, there's only so many things to sing about in a typical blues song, it seems. So if that's the only weakness, but the lyrics are still strong while the messages overlap, I've got no complaints. And I had no complaints. And I thought Robert Cray was better than a good singer. I thought he was very good. I thought he had it was kind of like if Lenny Williams had a little bit of blues grit instead of soul grit.
Sure.
Like,
not
that's
quite
what
the
it
chops,
felt.
though.
Not quite the range chops.
Yeah.
But that similar like smoothness in his voice mixed with just enough grit to make blues sound good. because if you're too smooth on the blues, you sound weird.
Sure.
Like nobody wants a pop singer singing the blues.
Mm-hmm.
But Robert Cray has just enough of that power in his voice while still having really good access to his range. And I was really impressed with it. So then we'll move on to Strong Persuader, which that is the one that you knew.
Correct.
And I had not known. So I was, again, going in blind. And
Other than what I told you.
Other than what you told me, yes.
Which is that it's, a favorite of mine.
Yeah, and, that automatically makes me hate it.
Right.
No, I'm kidding. But I did go in with expectations of, now I know who Robert Cray is. I know I really enjoyed the first album. I know that you praised the second album. And I just thought it lived up to it. I thought it was extremely strong all the way through. Again, lyrically, you're getting really, really meaningful lyrics throughout this. And I looked specifically, and the ones where he is credited as the first or second writer are the ones that I felt were the strongest. Mm-hmm. And that is impressive to me. I thought that maybe there were times when, if I have to nitpick, there was a little bit of a formulaic approach where it was like, all right, verse, then there's like a kind of breakdown, then there's a verse, then there's the solo, which is a rather simple arranged solo. So it's just kind of Robert Cray kind of talking on the guitar, which is technically very, very good. And I'm not going to knock his guitar playing at all. But when you hit like 4 songs in a row where it's like boom, boom, like you're checking all the boxes, you start to be like, okay, well, maybe mix it up a little bit. Mm-hmm. But subject matter wise, especially for the blues, strong, well done. Vocals held up really well done. And I have no official complaints about this album.
Excellent. Nor do I, as I really enjoyed this album as well. It actually did really well commercially for 86 in the blues. That's always good to hear. This went double platinum in the United States. It was ranked 42 on Rolling Stone's top 100 records of the 80s. So I think that's pretty cool. A lot to like here. All the things that I mentioned liking in the first record are just kind of intensified here. His voice is a lot clearer in his guitar playing. He has such a unique tone too for a blues guy because it's like paper thin. It's like very interesting. Like you don't necessarily hear guys going for a tone that thin, but it makes him very recognizable instantly.
And it's very expressive too.
It is, and he does not use much distortion really at all. So he does most of his soloing pretty clean and pretty thin. So you get an interesting voice, and there's not really any way to cover up what doesn't work when you're playing that way. Like you have to have it right. You have to play with the feel that you want to have, or you're going to, hear through that immediately.
Sure.
And then there's just a lot of great blues songs on here. And again, even more so than the first record, yes, it's a blues record first and foremost, but he is so concerned in a good way with having these songs arranged in a way that is also rock, that's also like even a little bit pop rock at the time. Like you just get good songs. There is no genre fatigue that sets in whatsoever on a record like this. And I particularly love the title track, even though it's not really the title track. It's called Right Next Door Because of Me, which I was thinking sort of is almost like an anti-Follow Me by Uncle Kracker. Because I know you talked like his one big, like his biggest hit is all about, trying to convince someone to, cheat on their spouse. Whereas this song is about the neighbor who did cheat with the spouse next door and is listening to their relationship and lives falling apart through the walls and is feeling immense regret about it and like doesn't know what to do. And so that was a better angle, I think, to take with that subject matter. More meaningful one.
Yeah, remorsefulness is the proper emotion to feel there.
Yeah, it definitely is. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to 2020's That's What I Heard. And the first thing that I heard when I heard this song was like, wow, he held up really well vocally. like he's not
100%.
perfect, but he sounds pretty damn close to how he sounded in 1986,
Let me tell you this, Nick.
which is great.
Before we go any further on this, what literally I listened to the first song and immediately went and checked the wiki. I normally listen first. And I was like, I have to know if like I saw 2020 on, my music listening platform that I listen to the albums on. And I went, that has to be a re-release. This has to be like a compilation or something. It sounded too good.
Yeah.
And then I was, after that first song, I noticed a little bit of like, okay, he definitely sounds like he's gotten a little older, but he sounded extremely similar.
Yeah. It was really good to hear. The music holds up again. All the tracks are very enjoyable to listen to. Now, I think the thing that is kind of tempering the blues, because we're always talking about with these records, like, well, how do you make sure it's consistently interesting, even if you're a pure blues artist? A lot of it is like old school R&B soul sounds that he is mixing and blending with his blues that gives these tracks a little bit of life. Really enjoyed that. And one person who, I don't know if you noticed, who has been commenting extremely positively on all of Robert Cray's albums
Is Robert Christgau.
Really loves Cray. He said at 66,
Mr.
one of the
Costco
sharpest
himself.
songwriters. Yeah, one of the sharpest songwriters ever to identify as a bluesman, which I think is kind of a cool thing for him to say, because it does, in fact, echo a lot of what I've been saying. He cares a lot about the individual songs to make sure that the full album experience is good in every way and not at all, fatiguing on the listener. So another really strong album. I'm glad to see he's held up so well. I look forward to more.
Yeah, and listen, I completely agree with what you're saying. I was extremely excited when I got to this album and started hearing how well he held up. Because if he held up that well in this album, I don't have to look for the decline, like where it happened.
Yeah.
Because typically when we hit artists and we get to their last album, and it's a big yikes.
Where did it go wrong?
Right. So then I get, then me as a fan after the episode has to go back and be like, all right, what can I listen to up to before I get sad? Like,
Sure.
like when do I get sad? And that never happens here because I'm not sad in the last album.
Right.
It's not even like, so there's artists that I love, like Elton John is a great example.
Mm-hmm.
I love Elton John, as we've talked about, we've discussed. I would be a fool to claim that he sounds the same now as he sounded in the 70s.
Sure.
His voice has changed.
Mm-hmm.
So I can still enjoy and really think that he's coming out with really top tier stuff, although
For sure.
his most recent two singles have been questionable. I will say that.
Well, fair enough. But the album we listened to is very good.
But the album we listened to was really good. And I think that, his voice has deepened and matured. I know he had some vocal issues. But like an artist like Robert Cray, I could put these songs together in a playlist of decades long and be completely content.
Yeah.
And I think that they all hold up extremely strongly. I think, yet again, you're hearing really promising writing, and you're hearing really promising lyricism from a blues artist, and that is just very rare to have happen.
Yeah.
And that's all I'll say about that. I think it's time to grade them.
Let's do it. So, cultural impact. Here we go. Here's what I'll say. Blues is not a super mainstream genre after like the 50s and the first half of the 60s or so. But Robert Cray has always, since his inception into the scene, has been a well-known figure, plays with all of the big blues artists. Like, everybody knows him. He did a ton of tours with Clapton, plays with legends like John Lee Hooker and everybody else in between. So he's well known on the scene, and he did have some commercial success in the middle of his career, particularly with Strong Persuader. Anytime you sell 2 million records, you're not nobody.
That is correct. For instance, our album is coming close to that threshold of 2 million. We only need 1,999,940
something. Yeah. Sounds right.
roughly.
And
But
5
yeah,
Grammys, by the way, also counts for
yeah.
something.
So
Like he's
I'm gonna list a couple accomplishments of Mr. Cray that we can kind of give him a little bit of a floor.
Mhm.
5 Grammy awards. He was inducted into the Blues Hall of Fame in
Right,
2011.
right.
He's received the Americana Music Lifetime Achievement Award for performance in
Hmm.
2017. So those are called. He's also was inducted into the Hollywood's Rock Walk,
Yep,
which is an important thing in Hollywood for rock musicians and
definitely.
musicians in general, obviously.
Yeah.
So he's been recognized. He's been well known, and I I feel like he's definitely above average. I mean,
Really
that's
interesting. Okay.
I'm not saying he's like a 7, 8, 9 plus, but I definitely think he's above average. I think for what he's done for the blues world, for the people he's worked with, for
Hmm.
the recognition, the success with his music, I'd be fine putting him somewhere in the fives.
Okay. I can't go too much above average just because
No,
it's just so not mainstream. But I mean, I do agree with what you're saying. Like from the 80s on, Cray is one of the biggest names in the scene for the last 40
yeah,
years. Like that's undeniable.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
I'm looking for like maybe like a 5.3.
and you know what? I'd be willing to give that to you.
Perfect.
So now we just have to take a quick look at his discography for his breadth of work. We've got how many records here?
A
No one
lot.
thought to count them.
I did not think to count them, to be honest. It's more than one.
20.
That's
I
more than
counted them.
one. I was
20
correct.
is more than one.
20 is, in
And
fact, more than one.
he gets a consistent quality bump for
A
sure.
very consistent quality bump for me as well.
And a little bit of sales
Yeah.
because he had 2 albums that certified pretty much all over the world in Strong Persuader and the follow-up, Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. We're
Yeah.
going gold or silver or platinum, really all over.
So that is all 3 pillars.
Yeah.
All 3 a little higher than average in the pillars.
Hmm.
2 of them are pretty above average with the
Yeah,
pillars.
sure.
And I would say that all things considered, I'd be fine putting him in like the mid 6s.
Yeah, I agree. How about like a 6.4?
I was going to say a 6.6, so let's do a 6.5.
You got it. Instrumental talent. Again, I think this bodes well for him. I think we're looking at another good score,
Yeah.
above average for sure. Um, his renown as a blues guitarist is definitely legitimate. And I also think he is a very good vocalist.
Yes.
I would probably be considering this to be about his best score of the day, although not like astronomically high.
Well, here is where there's something that I think should give him a bump that we haven't yet talked about. Robert Cray was also very well known pretty much since his inception as a band leader from the guitar.
Hmm.
So he is, I mean, that is a talent to do. Like it's one thing to be really good at playing a guitar or really good at singing, but to be like the leader of a big band and a big blues band, like that does bump it a little bit. So I think instead of being like probably realistically we would be looking at like a 6.7 or a 6.8.
I was thinking I would be fine with a number around 7.
Yeah, so maybe let's give him like a 7.1, a little bit of a bump
You
for the
got
big
it, dude.
band aspect of it.
Now, there are 2 sides of the coin for songwriting and poetic. One, I think we outlined that he does both of these things really well. 2, he does not write all of the songs on his records.
That is correct.
He's writing about half of them. A lot of his writing contributions come from like producers that he works with on these records. So it's not like he's just doing a bunch of covers, although there are some blues classics in there.
There are some
mixed into his discography. He just can't get credit for those here.
No, and I think what this is going to boil down to is for a blues artist, this is still going to be an astronomically high score.
Yeah.
As what we've had in the past.
It's going to be like in the 5s.
It's going to be in the 5s.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, you're correct. We cannot give him credit for 20 full albums of original music. because it's just unrealistic. But
Correct.
the music that he is writing is strong, and that is good because it's not
Definitely.
like he's living off of these covers.
Right, for sure.
We've had artists like where their original music just doesn't hold a candle to the covers they've done, and I
Yeah.
don't think that's the case here with Robert Cray.
Full agreement.
I would be totally fine putting him in for the songwriting category, like a 5.1 or 5.2, a little bit above average. Because at the end of the day, blues is blues, and it's
5.2.
it's
You got it.
5.2, and then like probably closer to like a 5.4 for the lyrics.
You got it. I agree. I think there was some strong stuff in there.
Yeah.
Now, X Factor. Did you know? I mean, you mentioned a bunch of his accolades and whatnot. Robert Cray was one of the many blues musicians jamming on stage the night that Stevie got into
I did know that.
his crash. So Cray was a part of that big blues jam where when they all left that night and Stevie got in his helicopter.
Yes,
crashed.
unfortunately.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's like a 0.1 of X Factor or not. I just figured I'd throw it out there because
I think that combined with what I'm going to say is a 0.1 of X Factor.
Okay.
Because I just appreciated to hear this.
I know what it's going to be.
Yeah, I know you know. So, Stand and Deliver by Van Morrison was a song that came out and caused a little bit of a controversy. And Eric Clapton was involved in said controversy. And because Eric Clapton kind of sided with Van the Man over the whole patriotism, like anti-mask kind of whole situation, Robert Cray was just like, okay, well, I'm not going to come on your tour then, Eric.
Yeah.
And canceled his participation in Clapton's 2022 European tour.
Yes, he did.
Which is cool. Because that's like, Eric Clapton is somebody I guess people are still a little bit afraid to say no to.
Sure.
Because of his status. Even though I think we've thoroughly established on this show that personality-wise, he's kind of a douche nozzle.
Sure.
So I just really appreciated Robert Cray being like, yeah, you're a douche nozzle.
Yeah. It makes me wonder, though, how many more albums is Van Morrison going to write about how mad he is about COVID? He's already written like 2 albums that are like super long about it. I feel like he's just going to keep going on this forever.
Just look at the number of albums he's come out with. He writes at such a prolific rate that it has to be multiple albums have to be about the same thing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like one wrong, like you know how Taylor Swift in her early career was like one breakup equaled one album.
Sure.
Like that, like for Van the Man, it's like one inconvenience equals 4 albums that all are just like the same 3 words in song form over and over again. And that's kind of what it boils down to.